Tucker Carlson just exposed the one-sided and immoral nature of the U.S.-Israeli alliance, and in this clip, in an interview with Doha Forum, he talks about the solution, and that's to cut all ties with Israel, that the United States only bears cost. We don't benefit from this relationship, this twisted and toxic relationship, in any single way. So let's watch. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Can I start by asking you why Americans, or if you feel Americans, have many misconceptions about this part of the world?
Well, because most people, not just Americans, but most people haven't been here. I mean, that's always the number one source of misconception, is lack of experience, direct experience. And so I'm so blessed by my job that I can travel, but I've traveled my whole life to places, and so I'm convinced that it's hard to really know what you're talking about unless you see it. And even then, it's hard to know. You don't speak the language. You're not from there. But you definitely don't have a sense of a place unless you visit it. So that's the main reason. And then there are, of course, lots of propaganda efforts going on designed to influence the direction of the U.S. government and the use of military force. And so there are sophisticated propaganda operations going on in Washington full-time, come from a lot of different sources. So those are the reasons.
Yeah, there's a concerted effort to pretend that Qatari influence is more palpable in the U.S. federal government than obvious Israeli influence. And we see that in the form of the propaganda machine calling Tucker Carlson a paid Qatari shill, as if Qatar isn't on the same page with Israel in many ways. In fact, the biggest U.S. airbase exists in the Middle East, in Qatar, just to protect Israel. And you see that there have been ties between those two countries working in concert, where it's not exactly like they're diametrically opposed in the way that Israel sees, for instance, Iran. For instance, Netanyahu and the Likudniks funneled $1 billion through Qatar to fund Hamas, propping up Hamas. It's the biggest egg on Netanyahu's face, what should forced him to resign over. But that's what you get here. So there's this mass propaganda engine to project and take culpability off of Israel's disproportionate and twisted relationship with the United States and influence it has on our government.
And in terms of the propaganda that you mentioned, do you think things are changing now? There's been talk of this shift away in American politics from a kind of unquestioning support for Israel. This has been a very difficult year, another very harrowing, difficult year in the region, not just in Gaza, but many other countries, Syria, Lebanon, escalation between Iran and Israel. What is your reading of all of this and Washington's kind of approach right now?
Well, the U.S., I'm speaking as an American who's from Washington. America should never pledge its support to any other country unconditionally. And that would go for the countries of my ancestors, Great Britain, Sweden, Finland, and it would go for Israel, Qatar, Saudi, UAE. And there is no country in the world to which the United States owes its unconditional support. That's crazy. The people who run the United States pledge their unconditional support only to American citizens and their voters. That's our system.
But yeah, so as you say, it's about accountability to the voters.
But it's really not. It's about accountability to the banks and Big Pharma and the military-industrial complex and the Israel lobby and big tech and big communications and big food and big medicine. All of that is the real constituency of Congress. Let's just be real about it. But I'm with Tucker Carlson that no country should enjoy unconditional support from the United States, including his ancestors, including my ancestors. There's no way in which that's feasible or logical. Americans don't benefit just from these ties to a foreign country where we get dragged into wars that they want, including the most recent one in Iran, which I don't think we've heard the end of, by the way. It's why we got sucked into the war in Yemen, to blockade the Yemenis at the behest of the Saudis. It's why we deposed Gaddafi in Libya. It's why we deposed or helped depose Assad in Syria through a clandestine CIA operation to fund ISIS and Al-Qaeda because Israel didn't like Assad as much as the fundamentalist Sunnis in that country. That's what we get from a 20-year occupation of Iraq. And don't get me wrong, there were culpable neocons and Israel shills in the federal government that made that happen. But it's not worth it. Get out of these stupid entangling alliances and empire-building projects. It's never worth it. Americans don't benefit, especially when we're suffering under debt and inflation and propaganda that divides us against each other over, our relative adherence to this rogue regime. I want nothing of that.
But has something shifted in the last couple of years amongst their voters? Is there is the kind of consciousness being raised in a way? Are there conversations happening with regards to the Palestinians and maybe even other issues in the region that were not happening 5 or 10 years ago?
Look, whenever the U.S. government acts on behalf of anyone other than American citizens, it is committing a moral crime. It is undermining the American system, which again is designed for one purpose, and that's to represent American citizens. It's self-government. It's a democratic republic. That's our system.
That's supposed to be the system. That's supposed to be the intent, but it's totally perverted, and it just comes off as kind of blue-pilled when you pretend otherwise. Now, I don't think Tucker is pretending otherwise. He's saying that's what we should have, and that's being violated by this relationship with Israel.
If you want to change the system and make it into some sort of autocracy that acts on behalf of another country, okay, change the system. But under our current system, it is immoral and illegal to act on behalf of another country over and above your country, period. So it's a foundational question. It's the foundational question. And that only happens when people don't know it's happening and aren't allowed to talk about it happening. And now people are talking about it, and of course the beneficiaries of our current perversion don't want to allow that conversation. But we have free speech in the United States. So what you're seeing is people exercising their free speech, and you're seeing a debate that is long overdue. And if there's another side to it, if you think that the point of the U.S. government is to serve a foreign country, tell me how.
But can I ask you?
Yeah, absolutely. That is correct. You're seeing people pitted against each other in the United States over this question, over how much they support Israel. Not over issues pertinent to their community, their lives, and their interests, but how far you cling to the Israel First doctrine. And I talked about this to Dave Smith. That's what the current mega civil war of sorts is being waged over. It's this question of siding with the Zionist Israelis on every single issue to the point where you're going to let the U.S. ambassador to Israel meet with Jonathan Pollard, the convicted Israeli spy who gave U.S. secrets from naval intelligence to the Israelis at the height of the Cold War, whereupon the Israelis passed them to the Soviet Union. It's when you let Israel get away with bombing Qatar, and there's no real ramifications for it. That's what we're dealing with.
If the conversation was long overdue, why is it only happening now?
People can only be led into an arrangement that acts against their own interests if they don't know it's happening or they're not permitted to notice it. Once they know it's happening and they're allowed to talk about it, it ends. It's literally that simple. So it's all about, are you allowed to say the obvious? And Americans, for a bunch of different reasons, using a bunch of different mechanisms, have not been allowed to do that. Now they are. I would give a lot of the credit to Elon Musk for buying and opening up Twitter, which he renamed to X, and all of a sudden there's a vigorous conversation about obvious things. Once that happens, there's no stopping it. And where we're going to arrive at some point, I think soon, is at the core promise of our existing system, which is the U.S. government is here to serve American citizens first and foremost. Sorry. Yeah, there's no stopping that. And there's no counter argument. So it's, if you say that, we'll shut you down, we'll silence you, we'll slander you, we'll shoot you. Making physical threats against people who are telling obvious truths. They are doing that a lot, including to me.
Do you feel?
Yeah, there's this saying by Ron Paul, my great hero, when he said, an idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army or any government. And that's what you're seeing play out now. Finally, people on the right questioning this attachment to Israel that hasn't paid dividends to our interests. And that's why people are speaking out against it. That's why you're seeing a massive swing in terms of sympathy toward the Palestinians since October 7th, a 50-point swing in that direction. Imagine any other issue where that could happen in U.S. politics. I don't really think there is.
You made quite a few trips here, but has something changed in the way you feel in the last couple of years? Do you feel
I feel
safe?
that I'm 56, my children are grown. I have an obligation, from my perspective, to tell the truth. In decency and kindness, by the way. Telling the truth does not mean attacking people or pointing out their obvious sins. No, telling the truth means telling the truth in love. What do you think is true? By the way, I've been wrong many times. I supported the Iraq War, okay? I've been wrong. And I know that I've been wrong, and I know that I will be wrong again. So I'm not claiming I have a monopoly on the truth. What I'm saying is, as an American citizen, I have a right to say what I think, and I'm going to.
Right on. Amen, brother. I was wrong about that too. I cheerled for the war in Iraq in 2003, and it's pretty embarrassing. But admitting that is powerful too, and I think that's why many people appreciate Tucker Carlson. He has humility to admit his past mistakes. Try to say that about Ben Shapiro. He doesn't. He never did. But Tucker does. He said, I supported evil. I supported monstrous murder machine in the form of the U.S. military. But there's power in turning away from that and exposing the truth also, and getting your audience to see past follies such that we try not to replicate those and advance those and keep those going into new eras and applying them to more countries. There's value in that.
Period.
How could this fight to reshape the American right possibly define how the U.S. engages with the Middle East? Could it potentially change everything?
The President of the United States recently sided in public with an Arab country over Israel. Israel bombed Doha. Qatar is one of our most important allies in the region. Our largest air base is in this country, Qatar. Qatar hosts Hamas at the request of the United States government and the Israeli government for more than 10 years. And Israel bombed a meeting here in Qatar in order to short-circuit Donald Trump's peace process. This was an attack not just on Qatar, but on America. Donald Trump saw it that way. He said he saw it that way, and he forced the Israelis to apologize to the government of Qatar. Nothing like that has ever happened. There's never been a situation where the U.S. president publicly took the side of an Arab country over Israel. That just happened.
All right, so here's where I'll push back. Yes, Trump publicly sided with Qatar over Israel on that bombing and forced the Israelis to apologize, but that didn't change any policy, any of the foreign policy itself. It wasn't an actual ramification against Israel. Did they withdraw any of the aid? Did it change palpably the U.S. strategy in the Middle East and siding with Israel literally on everything? No, it was just a media spectacle to get Netanyahu on the phone with the Qatari government and apologize. It didn't lead to any changes. Also, I'll push back when Tucker said that, the U.S. president has never sided with an Arabic nation over Israel. I think there are a few examples, one of which was the only great foreign policy instrument that Obama ever created, and that was the JCPOA. He sided against Israel in doing that. Netanyahu and the Israeli government hated that gesture, that strategy, because it took off the table the regime change they ever wanted in Iran. And it's why Trump shredded the JCPOA in his first term, opening the door to regime change there. There's other examples too where, for instance, Israel supported Iran in the Iraq-Iran war when the United States was supporting Iraq in the Iraq-Iran war. And the U.S. later supported Iran too. But that's a time in which the U.S. president sided effectively with an Arab country over Israel to some extent. They're few and far between examples, but they did exist.
That is a huge change. That is a seminal change. What are its long-term effects? I can only guess, but we've never seen that before.
And what about countries in the region? Just one final question. What about countries in the region? How might this shift in American politics possibly change the way that they engage? Could there be a rare opportunity for them to engage in a way that they haven't in this changing landscape?
I can't speak for any GCC government. I am an American, and so I will explain what I believe is the American perspective, which is we align with countries that share our values, but mostly we align with countries that have some strategic benefit to us. And this is a resource-dense part of the world. Energy is essential for civilization. And the country that we're most closely allied with has no resources. It has 9 million people. It is a completely insignificant country in the Levant. I'm speaking of Israel. It is an insignificant country from an American point of view. The only reason Israel is significant is because we provide a security guarantee. So we have to defend Israel because I'm not sure why. We have no moral obligation to defend Israel whatsoever. And there's no American interest inherent in Israel. They're the holy sites, which are great, and I think the world should be allowed access to them, to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, to the Church of the Nativity, and to Al-Aqsa Mosque, and to the Wall. But as a nation, as a secular nation, there is no overridingly value strategic interest in Israel for the United States. Like, what are we getting out of this? Nothing. It's only cost. Whereas, for example, the 6 GCC nations, there's a very obvious benefit to the United States.
Yeah, I have to largely agree with this. The one thing I will say is that I don't think it's rightful or pertinent or, the right strategy or policy to just align with other nations on behalf of them having similar values to us. No, we should just trade. The most beneficial strategic alliances on Earth are built through voluntary trade. They're not through military alliances or security guarantees. Those kind of entangling alliances are what Thomas Jefferson and George Washington warned about. The idea that you're going to get entangled in these foreign structures, these foreign alliance structures that allow us to inherit all of the enemies of our allies. It just hasn't served to our benefit. We know that at least since World War I, the Great War especially. It just never benefits us in any single way. And I'm with Tucker on, there's no strategic interest in Israel. Many Zionists have tried to purport that there is, and they usually say, well, they share our values. That's what Tucker is saying. You should align with countries that do share your values. And that's what the neocons say about Israel. Well, I don't think that's true. You share our values? Look at Gaza. What kind of American value does that share? None of them. Getting to a new war with Iran. No value shared over that. We don't want neocon regime change wars anymore.
So, of course, we should be closely allied with all 6 of these countries. And I know that they're constantly fighting with each other. But again, I'm an American looking at it from an American perspective. Those are very important relationships. Much more important than our relationship with Israel. Much more important. If you were to assess what's in America's interest purely that way, like we're gonna have relationships with other countries based on what's good for us. You would rate your relationship with Qatar, for example, as infinitely more important than your relationship with Israel. Infinitely more important. Now, there are a lot of people dedicated to lying about that. That's not true. They share our values. No. Qatar is a much more important relationship than a relationship with Israel. And I think that's starting to dawn on people. Why are we spending billions of dollars destroying our credibility, paying for the murder of children? Like, how is that good for us? I guess it's good for Bibi. Okay. But it's not good for us. And everyone knows it's not good for us. And only when they stick a gun in your face and tell you to shut up are you going to pretend that it's good for you. But if you're allowed to think for yourself, you realize that is not good. Period.
Amen. That's not good, period. Indeed. Tucker's exactly right about that. As far as whether it's more beneficial to align with Qatar over Israel, I don't want that choice. I don't want to align with either of those countries. I don't want empire-building projects in the Middle East that serve as justifications to put new U.S. bases up, as if 750 or 800 or whatever it is right now isn't enough. I don't think you have to decide between Qatar and Israel. I know that makes me the odd man out, right, in political discourse, where it's either Israel's the big problem for everything or Qatar's the big problem for everything. Well, actually, what the problem is a systematic attachment to foreign countries and deference to those countries over the United States, over our domestic woes, over the concerns of citizens that elect the government. And I think elections are largely a sham. The two major parties get filtered through the system where nominees are guaranteed to have to support Israel to become the nominee. That's part of the process, and that was the biggest litmus test, it seems to be, in Trump's cabinet, where every single member of the cabinet, whatever their spectrum of thoughts is on various issues, they are Zionist. That was the litmus test, and that's what Miriam Adelson guaranteed when she gave Trump $100 million in his last campaign. And Sheldon Adelson gave Trump hundreds of millions of dollars in the previous electoral cycles. That's what you get. It's this Israel first attachment that's so pervasive in this presidential administration, in Congress, and in the bureaucracy. And it's not going to stop until AIPAC and the Israel lobby loses its influence here. And I do think that their support is being chipped away at. There is a rich donor class willing to continue to facilitate that, despite how many Americans just have turned their heads around on that issue and retreated from that mentality where that's what we have to support. That has to be a big part of a person's political platform. That Zionist donor class will still exist, but Americans have turned away. That might translate eventually and manifest into political changes. I don't think it's going to be in the next few years, but I do think it will be in 10 years. I can't say it's going to affect the 2028 elections. I'd imagine we do get a pro-Israel Republican nominee and a pro-Israel Democratic nominee, as we basically always do. But at the same time, these things take time to manifest politically. It's like Breitbart when he said that politics is downstream from culture. I think that's true, but the independent media is helping to expose the vile and immoral nature of this attachment, which, as Tucker said, is leading to the literal murder of children. And then we're supposed to back that, we're supposed to justify that, and then we're supposed to make excuses for that, like they're all Hamas. All the 20,000 children that have been killed by Israel since October 7th are Hamas. This disproportionate murder machine that's unfurled by the Likudniks and the Greater Israel Project to expand the West Bank settlements in Syria and Lebanon, to get into new wars with Iran during it, to bomb Qatar, another U.S. ally, and have that lead to no ramifications for Israel. Well, Americans have had enough. Americans that follow this have had enough. And even Americans that don't follow Middle East foreign policy that closely, I think are starting to wake up to this idea that this is just a twisted sense of priorities. This priority structure is not something that Americans can support. So while they go to the grocery stores and gas stations and pay out the gazoo for food and fuel, they know that their government, instead of caring about that, just cares about funneling money into Netanyahu's pockets. Boasts about the attachment to the Adelsons and giving Israel everything they want. That's what they see on the screen from Trump. They see the cover-up of the Epstein files and a scandal to not tell the truth about that. They see the idea of potential regime change in Venezuela being at the forefront of the minds and masterminds in Washington. That's what they see. But what do you guys think? Do you think Tucker Carlson's right about this? Is this leading our government astray from the interests of Americans? What's the best solution? Is it to attach closer with countries like, the UAE or Qatar over Israel? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to Doha Forum. Great conversation, really appreciated it. Thank you for the questions. And if you like this video, please consider becoming a YouTube member. You can do that by clicking the join button down below. And if you do that, you can get immediate access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. Also, if you want a free copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below, and that'll shoot you out to a site where you can just plug in your email, and then I'll send you a free PDF copy of that book. No cost or obligation, just because I appreciate you. And as always, our demands are simple. No more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.
What did they accuse you of doing wrong? Had you called for armed insurrection against the Starmer government, or what was their claim?
No, I don't even believe in that, never mind call for it. And so here I am, sitting in a police station in Gatwick Airport with armed men questioning me on my political views. I'm not saying this because I hate Britain, but because I love it.
There's an attack on free speech in the West, and it most commonly manifests right now in Britain, where people are either being detained or jailed for free speech violations. They said the wrong thing, the thing that the government didn't want them to say. And the latest is George Galloway, a former MP. He's 70 years old, was recently detained ostensibly because of his political views, not being in compliance with what the English authorities wanted. Well, this could be a harbinger for things to come in the United States, so Tucker talks to him about it, so let's check that out. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
George Galloway, thank you very much for doing this. I'm sitting in London, in the city of London right now. I'm an American. You're a citizen of the country I'm sitting in, but you're not in this country. You're in another country. Why are you there, and when are you coming back?
Well, it's a long and difficult story. It started last month when my good wife and I were detained but not arrested by the anti-terrorism police at Gatwick Airport in London. Now, ponder that piece of Kafkaesque framing. You are not under arrest, but you are not free to leave, they said. These pistol-packing anti-terrorist cops. They said you have no right to silence, and if you refuse to answer any of our questions, you will automatically be guilty under the Terrorism Act of an act in defiance of that very serious act. And the policeman joked, good luck ever getting on an airplane again. Now, to complete the framing, I'm 71 years old, 7 times elected Member of Parliament, a member of the British Parliament across 5 decades, the leader of a British political party, the biggest broadcaster in Britain, not nearly as big as you, but the biggest British broadcaster in Britain, broadcasting to the largest audience every single week. I'm one of the best known people in the country, and I've got armed anti-terrorist police telling me I'm not under arrest, but I am not free to leave. And of course, it quickly turned out that the purpose of the pull, the detention, was speech. My podcasts, my broadcasts, my tweet output, my Facebook output. That's the Britain that we now have today.
Yeah, isn't that sick and twisted and so ironic when it comes to the fact that in many ways the legal precedents that ended up in defining free speech as an integral part of the West and Western values, Western individual rights come from Britain? That this was based on a long series of precedents. Man, of course, has the right to speak naturally, but this was codified into the English Bill of Rights as a repudiation against James II, who was trying to deny that right to Protestants and enact a Catholic-based regime. And there was a bloodless revolution essentially to overthrow him. It was called the Glorious Revolution of 1688. And that's why, in many ways, we have this defining precedent that the United States patriots, the United States founding fathers, built upon. That the fact that we do have free speech as a result of natural law, as a result of our creator, but we're going to codify that constitutionally. Well, they're violating this. And he is the leader of a party. He's the leader of the Workers' Party in Britain, a long-term MP. He does have a podcast. And guess what? He calls for peace. And that's about the most big cardinal sin that you can do these days, calling for peace. He opposes Israel. He opposes NATO and the US and the UK's war, the proxy war versus Russia. And for that, they're trying to detain him. It's, you know, a horrifying prospect that this could leak into the United States and play a role here too.
And we spent 4 hours in my case, 5 hours in my wife's case, in 2 separate rooms, surrounded by armed police officers, being questioned about our political views. And in my wife's case, her fingernail, which is painted rather nicely in the Palestine colors. Now, if you had told me 8 weeks ago that such a thing was even remotely possible, I would not have believed you. There is no more patriotic British citizen than me. In the last decade, Mr. Carlson, I fought two major battles for the British state. 2014, The Spectator said, my speeches saved the Union, when Scotland's separatist referendum looked very much like it was going to succeed. And 2016, I was one of the leading figures in the Brexit movement, trying to win Britain's independence. And so here I am, sitting in a police station in Gatwick Airport with armed men questioning me on my political views.
And that's all it takes. If you support any kind of secession, as Brexit was, peaceful secession from the European Union, that was supported by a narrow majority of the English populace. But when it was, you didn't hear all this clamor among the forces that are so keen to defend democracy in every case say, hey, well, I guess democracy spoke. No, there was a concerted effort to try to push that back, and you had heroes like George Galloway and Nigel Farage that saved that prospect for Britain. I think we could use a little bit of that sentiment in the United States now with a Leviathan federal government that tries to commandeer the states and reign as an oligarchy above 330 million people. But George is put in this situation because he wants peace. How ironic is that when they'll make you president or prime minister when you support wars, but try to end one and they'll paint you as a supervillain. They'll pretend you're an enemy of the state, persona non grata, that should be detained for your political views. Just think of that.
So the trauma of all that, to be honest, being outside of the country is the least of it. If I tell you, and nobody knows this except you and me and whoever watches, it literally broke my heart. I now have a cardiologist. I'm a man who never lost a day through illness at work in my entire life. And now I have a heart condition, arrhythmia, which the consultant cardiologist, a very fine one, tells me is of recent provenance. So you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to work out that these cops actually broke my heart.
First of all, let me just commend you for your very long string of good calls. You were against the Iraq War, you were against Scottish secession, and you were for Brexit. So I don't think there are many people who can say they were right in all three. But I'm confused as to why a 70-year-old former member of parliament would be considered a terror threat. And what was the pretext for doing this to you? Do you know?
Well, the Terror Act, through which I sat in its passage and opposed it every line, precisely because of the possibility of its abuse in this kind of way, allows the police to seize your documents, seize your telephone, your laptop, seize everything, only at the port. They would need a warrant to do it anywhere else in the country, and they'd be very unlikely to get one in regard to me. But they saw the opportunity of stopping me under that act and divesting me of my whole life.
And just think of how sickening that is. And he's not the only one. He's a prominent person, and I'm glad it's being covered because of his prominence. You do this to a prominent person, it's going to get a lot more coverage. But there are viral videos going around on Facebook and TikTok and Instagram of people being questioned by the authorities in Britain for this. The bastion of free speech, the birthplace of, constitutional free speech in so many regards, where this is happening. And then you had Democrats in the last election cycle calling for more policing of disinformation on the internet, taking after Britain. You had Kamala Harris and AOC and Tim Walz and Hillary Clinton doing that. And now you have Republicans trying to crack down on free speech as it pertains to Israel. If you're a critic of Israel, you won't have the same speech rights, say, in terms of receiving federal disaster relief. That story came up, a few months ago. This is a potential big issue that could set a precedent if it seeps into the United States. You could have a Ministry of Truth literally prosecuting these crimes in a way that's so senseless and anti-American, it's hard to even portray it accurately as, how egregious that would be.
Everything, my parliamentary correspondence, my legal correspondence, my personal family pictures, my political correspondence, the members of my party, the membership list of my party, and they took it. And this is precisely the abuse of the word terrorism that you saw in London yesterday, where old ladies, old men, people in wheelchairs, blind people, are being arrested under the Terrorism Act for holding up a placard, a little piece of cardboard at their breast, and they are being taken away under terrorism charges. This is the nightmare that is Britain. Your stature will definitely not be a cause for your being huckled in the way that I was. You are a very big global figure. They wouldn't dare to touch you to get your telephone, to get your laptop. But if they could even do it to me, then I ask you to ponder just who would be safe in Britain from that.
Wow, I mean, that is true. If they'll go after this prominent former MP, they will go after you. They certainly will. And this is based off the Terrorism Act of 2000 in Britain. It's also called Martin's Law, that was enacted to kind of fight against terror. It was part of, the grand war on terror drive that we saw in the United States, too, that brought us the Patriot Act of the DHS and, 20 plus year occupations of Afghanistan and Iraq. We got the surveillance state expanding broadly during that time frame. They'll always take these precedents that are left in a legal context and then apply them internally to distance. They said that this was only for terrorism. Well, they're going after George Galloway now. And guess what? Me and George have a lot of differences in things like economics, but I don't care. He's a hero for standing against this, for standing for free speech when so many of his fellow Britons, especially in the political class, will not fight for it. Not whatsoever. And will they not fight for it? Not only will they not, they'll drive in this absurd prosecution campaign against dissidents to completely annihilate free speech.
So, to complete my answer to your first question, I'm not going back to Britain until I know that that will not happen again, not least because of the health problem that it has given me after the first time. And they will not give me an assurance that it will not happen again. And if you think about it, why would it not happen again? Because it happened because of my broadcasts and the fact that the British state and the Stumer, Keir Starmer, who leads it for the moment, at least, don't like what I say on my podcast. Well, I'm still broadcasting every Sunday and Wednesday, and I still have the same point of view.
Amen. That's the attitude we all need to have. That's incredible. I love that response by him.
So there's no guarantee whatsoever that the same thing wouldn't happen to me again. My wife couldn't sleep or eat for weeks after it. She's already thin. She lost 10 pounds nearly in weight as a result of the trauma of this occasion. We knew that it had happened to other people, but we didn't think that we would be regarded as other people because of the position I have over 50 years in politics in Great Britain. But it did happen, and it could happen again.
What did they accuse you of doing wrong? Had you called for armed insurrection against the Starmer government, or what was their claim?
No, I don't even believe in that. Never mind call for it. I believe in democracy. I believe in freedom of speech. That's the problem. We are governed by a prime minister and a pygmy cabinet, which rubber stamps every cockamamie scheme he has to take us into war with Russia. Now, I don't want to go to war with Russia, not for Russia's sake, but for Britain's sake, for the sake of the British people whose blood and treasure would be burned, and the British people whose country might disappear into cinders and ash.
Yeah, so just listen to that. Because he wants to avoid a war with a nuclear power and he opposes censorship, that's why they detained him. That's why they questioned him. That's why they put his family, including his wife, through all this turmoil. And think of that. Think of that potential. And then the fact that some people want to unleash this hellscape in America. And it's just too absurd, man. It's just too anti-American. It's just too senseless. And just completely outside of the principles of the best things that we hold dear in our society.
Underneath their feet, if such a war were to take place. So the proximate reason, insofar as one can glean it from 4 hours of circumlocution, is that I oppose the British government's policy towards Russia. Now, I might be right on that. I might be wrong on that. But as John Stuart Mill points out, if you deny a point of view the right to be heard, the loser is not the person with that point of view,
Yes.
but the rest of us.
Yeah, so think of that. This Terrorism Act of 2000, used to try to safeguard Britain from terrorist threats, is being wielded against anti-war dissidents like George Galloway for opposing war with Russia. Think about that. And if that law can be so arbitrarily applied to heroes like George Galloway, just think of what they'll do to eliminate dissent towards wars in the future. If he goes down for this, if they can detain him and that becomes a precedent, and guess what? If someone goes further beyond that and says, don't sign up for conscription because of this, like they tried to ban during World War I in the United States, the Espionage Act, they'll push it even further. They'll keep pushing and pushing and pushing until we're all the enemy. We're all the terrorists. And that's exactly what the deep state does to try to ruin our lives. We saw it with the War on Terror. This has been used for FBI entrapment schemes in the United States. In January 6th, the Whitmer kidnapping plot, the bridge plot in Ohio. It happens time and time again.
Because we will not hear what might actually turn out to have been good advice. But that's not the way these social democrats, Christian Democrats, all across Europe, have put the lights out on freedom of speech, lights out on democracy. They're interfering in elections. They're canceling other people's elections. They are throttling free and independent media. They are bankrolling stooge media to try and crowd it out. They are threatening the social media platforms with sanction and even closure if they don't kowtow to the prevailing orthodoxy. And I'm afraid Britain is in the vanguard of all of that. And I make this point. I'm not saying this because I hate Britain,
Yes.
but because I love it. It is an ache for me to be outside of my country all of this time. I have children there. I have a house there. I have a very keen addiction to the English Premiership in football, soccer, you call it. I'm torn from all of that. I'm torn from my family and friends. So it's a dull ache for me. But it's not as painful as another armed arrest by the anti-terrorism squad would be. So for the time being, it looks like my wife and I are around the world in 80 days. And
Yeah, I mean, George is a real hero, if you ask me. He is a guy that stands on the best principles of his society, that his society was once known for. These individual rights, individual liberties had been denied. Kings had violated them all the time. The Stuarts, certainly, Charles I, King John, Henry VIII. Of course, there were kings that violated the most sacred precepts of England, but those sacred precepts, which recognize natural law, are things that he is defending, in contradiction to his government that wants to punish him for this. Detain him, stop him from conducting his affairs, and who cares what kind of ramifications that has on his family. He's not the youngest spring chicken, and his wife is suffering over this more than him, it seems like. But I'm so glad that he's doubling down. He's not apologizing. He's saying this is why it happened, and I'm still broadcasting. I love that part. That unapologetic attitude is the attitude that will save the West. It will save both Britain and the United States. And really the only thing I disagreed with what he said is, if I was a Brit, I would probably support the secession of Scotland for the same reason that if I'm an American, I would support the secession of California. That would be beneficial for both parties in both countries. Fair enough if he doesn't have that perspective, and to some extent it doesn't matter because I'm not British. But at the same time, the Scots are more socialist leaning. They don't have, my same general attitudes toward those subjects. As far as I see it, they can secede peacefully. That's what I would want for places in the United States that would not want to be controlled by Washington, including California, and it would benefit them for leaving if they are so distraught by the way things operate in Washington. Same thing with Texas. I don't care about the political leanings. I think that would be beneficial to all parties to some extent. But at the same time, everything else I totally agree with. And it doesn't really matter to some extent because, like I said, I'm not British. But George Galloway is really a hero, man. And he is just one of those dissident guys that's so interesting. A lot of Americans don't know who that is. But he's a really interesting guy with pretty, conservative-leaning proclivities, but also, he's an open socialist. And he's anti-war, but he's also very pro-free speech. The kind of politician that you just don't see in the United States at all. He really is kind of an aberration in Britain, too. But this is just horrifying. This cannot serve as a harbinger for the United States. We cannot allow these draconian free speech laws to go into effect and just propagandize them as if it's saving the United States, providing security. We can't emulate this pattern. It's destroying Britain. It so clearly is. And I'm so glad in a way that this is being exposed because of the George Galloway story. Hate the fact that he was detained, but thankfully this is getting more coverage than I think it's ever gotten. So thanks, George and Tucker. Great interview segment. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel too. And please subscribe to Tucker. This is an awesome segment, like I said. What do you guys think? Do you think this is a precursor to what we're likely to see in the United States, regardless of who runs our country or who's elected in 2028 or otherwise? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, like I said. And also, if you like this video, please consider becoming a YouTube member. You can do that by clicking the join button below. And if you do that, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. You'll be able to see those members-only videos right away. And also, if you want a free copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below. I'll shoot that out to you in PDF form, right to your email. No cost, no obligation, just because you're awesome for watching my channel. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.